Welcome to the debate. Today, we are examining one of the most critical and frankly painful subjects in structural engineering, the collapse mechanisms of the World Trade Center complex on September 11th, 2001.
Indeed. And we're really focused on the central question. Does the physical evidence surrounding the collapse of Towers 1, 2, and importantly, 7 fundamentally support the official finding of a fire-induced progressive collapse?
Right. Or does the evidence, specifically concerning things like the speed and the thermal characteristics, does that necessitate serious consideration of, alternative mechanisms?
Exactly.
From my perspective, I maintain that despite the, unparalleled nature of the catastrophe, the failures can be attributed to the unique combined effects of the initial high-speed aircraft impact damage and the subsequent massive, uncontrolled jet fuel fires. These factors led to an inevitable progressive failure mode, even if some of the results, like the speed, defied conventional modeling.
And I approach it differently. I believe the physical evidence, when you really examine it through the lens of established physics and material science, is overwhelmingly inconsistent with a standard gravity-driven fire collapse. The characteristics we observed, particularly that near freefall speed and the thermal residue, strongly point toward, something else: the preparation and use of advanced materials or even controlled demolition.
Okay, that's a compelling stance. But let's be precise about the initiating event here. The collapse wasn't just caused by fire alone. It was initiated by a Boeing 767 and a 757 severing dozens of critical core and perimeter columns, a huge amount of damage.
No question about the initial damage, yes.
And then the subsequent jet fuel fires burning at theoretical maximums around, say, 1800 degrees Fahrenheit in open air subjected the remaining structure to immense stress. Now, it's crucial to remember, as you know, that while steel doesn't melt at that temperature, it melts way up at 2750 degrees Fahrenheit. It does lose critical strength. At approximately 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, structural steel can lose about 50% of its load-bearing capacity. So when that threshold was breached, the sheer weight of the intact upper floors, maybe 15 to 20 stories, acted as an overwhelming static load. It forced a structural failure that simply overcame the building's considerable safety margins.
Right, I understand the argument about strength loss, but the key contradiction here for me isn't just the loss of strength. It's the resulting dynamics of the collapse. We really have to discuss the physics of the speed. Towers 1 and 2 fell in roughly 10 seconds, okay? And WCC-7 fell for a confirmed 2.25 seconds. That's over 8 stories at the acceleration of gravity. Actual free fall.
Mm-hmm.
Now, progressive collapse by its very definition requires time. It requires energy absorption for each descending floor to crush the floor beneath it, bending beams, severing bolts, overcoming all that structural resistance. This process, while it should yield a collapse lasting much longer, maybe 30, 40, even 60 seconds, based on calculations, the observed speed suggests the structure beneath offered essentially zero resistance, and that fundamentally defies the conservation of momentum in a gravity-driven collapse.
The near free-fall speed is visually and physically anomalous. I absolutely agree. It's striking. However, asserting that the absence of resistance automatically requires explosives is, I think, a leap. I would argue that the speed reflects an instantaneous catastrophic failure mode. The initial damage was so extensive, the fires so debilitating that the remaining structure's integrity was essentially reduced to zero right at the point of failure.
But how does that work physically?
Well, consider the mechanics. The massive upper section, once it became unstable, generated an enormous wave of kinetic energy. It wasn't acting like a stack of floors buckling one by one, but more like a single blunt force hydraulic ram. This huge momentum just sheared the remaining connections and structural members in its path so quickly that the time necessary for measurable resistance to even register was, negligible.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that explanation for negligible resistance. Let me tell you why. If you dropped an object, any object, from the top of the Twin Towers, with zero air resistance, it would hit the ground in about 9.2 seconds. So if the towers fell in 10 seconds, that implies over 100 floors of heavy steel, concrete, and trusses provided less than 1 second of total resistance combined. Structural engineers, people like Ron Brookman, have argued very strongly that this is physically impossible unless the underlying columns have been actively removed. How does a momentum wave, as you put it, instantly and symmetrically eliminate all resistance across a 100-story structural grid, especially in WTC-7, where 8 entire stories fell perfectly at freefall acceleration? That wasn't impacted by a plane.
Okay, that does lead us directly to the material evidence, specifically what you call the thermal anomalies. You cite observations of extremely high temperatures.
Exactly. We have consistent reports, multiple sources, indicating temperatures completely incompatible with the known fuel source. Jet fuel, as we agreed, burns at a maximum of about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit in open air. Yet, we have reports from Leslie Robertson, the WTC structural engineer himself, and numerous recovery workers confirming molten steel, or at least molten metal that looked like steel, running in the rubble pile for weeks after the collapse. Steel melts at 2,750 degrees Fahrenheit, the presence of molten metal requiring temperatures far, far exceeding what office fires or jet fuel can achieve, especially maintaining that intense heat underground for extended periods. Well, that's a profound mystery under the official narrative.
I see the challenge posed by the duration and the apparent intensity of the heat. I do. However, the discovery of materials like the iron microspheres and the appearance of that sulfurized, rapidly oxidized steel, often described as having Swiss cheese-like holes, this might be the complex result of previously unstudied metal interactions. You have to remember, the Twin Towers were composed of thousands of tons of composite materials, including specialized alloys, fireproofing, office contents, everything. When you expose all of that to a massive, long-duration, high-temperature combustion environment, particularly one where combustion products are reacting with the steel alloys themselves, you could get unique metallurgical outcomes. The presence of sulfur, for instance, is known to lower the melting point of steel alloys and accelerate its oxidation and weakening, potentially leading to rapid structural failure without actually reaching the full melting point of pure iron or standard structural steel.
That's, it's a compelling argument, perhaps, for the unusual oxidation patterns, the Swiss cheese steel. But it still completely fails to account for the finding of unreacted, military-grade, energetic material in the dust. The discovery of nanothermite residue, confirmed in a peer-reviewed paper by scientists like Dr. Niels Harrit and Dr. Stephen Jones, is direct evidence of a controlled chemical reaction designed for destruction. This material is specifically engineered to burn at incredibly high temperatures, around 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which perfectly explains the molten iron microspheres found ubiquitously in the dust. Furthermore, these red-gray chips found in the dust samples were proven to exhibit highly energetic, even explosive reactions in laboratory conditions. This strongly suggests it was an active component in the destruction, not merely some strange byproduct of unusual fire chemistry.
Okay, let's turn now to WTC-7. This is often brought up because it lacks that initial confounding variable of a plane impact. This building collapsed quite symmetrically at 5:20 p.m. Now, the official explanation rests on fire, specifically fire caused by debris raining down from WTC-1, which supposedly ignited fires on multiple floors. These fires over several hours are said to have led to the thermal expansion and subsequent failure of a specific critical load-bearing component, column 79.
Right, column 79.
This column supported a major transfer structure across about 10 floors. Its failure, the argument goes, led to a localized cascading collapse that then overwhelmed the entire structural integrity of the building.
What WTC-7 is the historical anomaly we simply cannot ignore. It is the only steel-frame skyscraper in history to have collapsed symmetrically, apparently from fire alone. Meanwhile, WTC-5 and WTC-6, right next door, were severely damaged, gutted by fire, and burned for hours, yet they did not collapse. The single-column failure hypothesis, well, it has to overcome not just the physical contradiction of the freefall speed we already discussed, but also the symmetry.
If one critical column failed, basic Newtonian physics dictates the building should fall asymmetrically towards the point of weakness. Instead, it imploded, straight down, perfectly into its own footprint. That is a signature characteristic of deliberate prepared structure removal, often called controlled demolition. And we also have to acknowledge the highly irregular eyewitness testimony, things like Deputy Fire Chief Gansey ordering evacuation due to expected collapse, or Deputy Director Barry Jennings' account of hearing explosions in the lobby of WTC-7 before either twin tower had even fallen. That suggests preparation well in advance.
I would argue the structural path integrity in WT7 must have been far more compromised internally than the exterior visually showed. Perhaps the collapse wasn't caused by just one isolated column failure initiating everything, but by the resulting progressive failure across multiple floor spans once key supports were thermally weakened and removed. However, I do want to pivot the discussion slightly to the investigation process itself, which I know you've raised as a major concern.
Yes, absolutely. I fundamentally challenge the integrity of the official investigation based on the rapid and, frankly, inexplicable destruction of crucial forensic evidence. Over 200,000 tons of structural steel, the primary evidence of the collapse mechanism, was immediately cut up and shipped overseas for scrap, much of it within weeks of the event. This action just flies in the face of standard disaster protocol. Look at the Challenger explosion, or TWA Flight 800 evidence is meticulously preserved, often for decades. The rapid clearing of the site, which was designated a crime scene, effectively eliminated the possibility of a thorough, independent metallurgical and engineering analysis on the vast majority of the structural components.
Well, we must counter that assertion by recognizing the immense logistical necessity faced by officials on the ground. The rapid cleanup, while yes, admittedly devastating to forensic preservation in some ways, was arguably justified by the immediate and desperate need to clear that massive debris field. There were ongoing recovery efforts for survivors, huge public safety concerns, and the need to stabilize the surrounding metropolitan area, which was, let's not forget, designated a disaster zone. I fully admit that the resulting analysis was limited, focusing on only 236 steel sections, a tiny fraction of the total, but the decision was likely driven by the extreme exigency of the situation.
But the concerns go beyond just the steel. We have the extraordinary issue of the black boxes, the flight recorders. 4 out of 4. The flight data recorders and the cockpit voice recorders from the 2 planes that hit the Twin Towers were officially declared never found. Now, these devices are specifically engineered to withstand the exact temperatures and impact forces encountered in crashes. A near-zero recovery rate in this specific instance is unheard of in modern aviation history, especially when locator beacons should have been active. Contrast that with the reported survival of a hijacker's paper passport, which allegedly survived the initial impact, the intense fireball, and the complete gravitational collapse of the tower, only to be found conveniently on the street. Meanwhile, thousands of metal-cased computer hard drives, potentially containing crucial data from companies within the towers, were supposedly destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery.
The sheer selectivity of what evidence supposedly survived and what vanished fundamentally strains credibility regarding the thoroughness and impartiality of the forensic collection process.
Okay, to summarize my position, while there are genuine anomalies, things that are hard to explain easily, like the rapid speed of collapse, the unusual thermal duration reported, and the, yes, acknowledgedly troubling handling of some evidence, these points, in my view, do not fundamentally negate the initial physical reality. We had unprecedented impacts followed by massive, uncontrolled fires. The complexity of the WTC's innovative structural design, when pushed far beyond its known operational limits, likely led to failure modes that remain technically challenging to model perfectly, perhaps even today. But these failures, I believe, still adhere to the fundamental principles of structural failure under extreme load and extreme heat.
And my conclusion remains steadfast. When the physical evidence, including confirmed freefall acceleration observed in WTC7 and the discovery of advanced high-temperature energetic materials like nanothermite in the dust, directly violates the established laws of physics regarding load-bearing resistance during collapse, then the scientific imperative demands a new, truly independent investigation. We must rely on preserved evidence and rigorous physics, not on explanations that seem to conveniently dismiss fundamental structural engineering principles when they become inconvenient.
Well, I think we both agree that the material surrounding this event is incredibly critical, it's complex, and it absolutely demands continued rigorous examination from all angles.
Absolutely.
Considering both the technical findings supporting the official account and the substantive challenges raised by the alternative perspective is essential for anyone trying to understand what happened.
Agreed. The pursuit of truth, wherever it leads, is the only way to truly honor the victims. And hopefully, this discussion gives our listeners critical details to conduct their own analysis.